Hello, my name is Doug Dortch, minister at Captiva Chapel by the Sea. Thank you for joining me today as we consider a brief message on how all of us could stand a little time away from the demands of everyday life. A message that I hope will bring you some encouragement for your day. Well, here we are in the middle of summer, and I hope that you have found some time to get away from the daily grind, or if not, that you've made some plans to do so because the fact of the matter is that it's good for everyone to get away from time to time. It's good to be able to break away from the pressures and the demands of everyday life so that we can experience a little rest and hopefully a little renewal. Like all type A personalities, I'm all for doing and working and making, but a person who always burns the candle at both ends, that person eventually winds up losing something in the process that keeps him or her from being fully human. There is a reason, after all, that they call everyday life a rat race. God did not wire us to be perpetual machines. God created us to be humans in His image. God created us to be a people God intended to observe the same rhythms of work and rest that God observed, at least according to the first chapter of Genesis. And I'm sure that's why, according to Mark's Gospel in the 6th chapter, Jesus himself felt the need to take his disciples with him to what Mark calls a quiet place where they could get some rest. Mark's Gospel, you should know, is characterized by students of the New Testament as an action gospel. An action gospel. That's because the word immediately occurs 17 times in this 16 chapter gospel. So there's a lot of hurry in the Gospel of Mark, and most of it has to do with Jesus, who knows that his time on earth is limited as far as doing God's work is concerned. And yet Jesus also knows that the demands of bringing to bear divine help upon human need also requires these pockets of inactivity, these moments of solitude, which is why even in the midst of doing God's work, Jesus withdrew from the crowds to spend some alone time with God. So in the 6th chapter of Mark's Gospel, the disciples have just returned from a remarkably successful ministry tour where they have preached and they have driven out demons and they have anointed many sick persons back to health. And so, they were probably feeling their oats, as the saying goes, and probably were thinking that they could take on the world given their recent accomplishments. But notice how even in Mark's action gospel, Jesus slows them down. Come away with me, he says to them. Come away with me by yourselves to a quiet place, and let's get some rest. That word, quiet place, it's an interesting translation. On the surface, it may sound like Jesus is moving them to this peaceful, bucolic getaway somewhere around the Sea of Galilee, but the word can also be translated desert place, as in wilderness place, which connotes quietness, but also barrenness, desolation. So why would anybody be interested in going to a place like that? A place of barrenness, a place of desolation? And the answer is because throughout Scripture, especially in the Old Testament, the wilderness serves as a place of revelation. Think about when Moses heard God's call and when he received God's commandments. It was in the wilderness of Sinai. Think about when Israel experienced the provisions of God, and in particular when they received the manna, the bread from heaven. Yes, it was in the wilderness. And where did Elijah hear the still small voice and then find the strength to return to Israel to contend with Ahab and Jezebel? You got it. It was in the wilderness. So here in Mark's Gospel, just in the first chapter, there are 4 references to the wilderness as being a place of proclamation. Jesus is identified as the Son of God by John the Baptist. It's a place of revelation. It's a place of preparation. Jesus is baptized. He spends time in the wilderness going through temptations in order to prepare himself for what God has called him to do. So it's no wonder that in this 6th chapter, Jesus invites his disciples to join him in the wilderness where they might better hear his word, receive his teaching, and be formed to carry out his ministry. I like the image of wilderness because it fits so much better with the world that so many of us inhabit today. I like it because of the way it holds up before us the promise that while we may have those special places where we are able to vacate, to get away from the many things that tug and pull at us day in and day out, places like Captiva and Sanibel, we also need to have a place where even in the midst of the chaos and the confusion that we have to deal with on a daily basis, we can even there get away with Jesus so that we can be re-energized and renewed for the work that Jesus calls us to do. Every time I read the 6th chapter of Mark's Gospel and Jesus' invitation to his disciples to get away with him to a quiet place, I can't get past the fact that in spite of how Jesus has called them to do so, by the time the group gets to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, notice the multitudes have run ahead of them on foot, and they have arrived to where Jesus and the disciples will soon be landing. That's some getaway, isn't it? Just a short boat ride across a finger of the Sea of Galilee, and then waiting on you on the other side is a world of hurt and pain. So what do we make of that? Well, might the text be telling us that if you can get away from the crush of everyday life to spend some time with Jesus, then that's a good thing. Removing yourself for an extended period of time from the hustle and bustle, better to hear the heart of God, is a very good thing indeed. But if you can't remove yourself in that way for that long a period of time, then it's equally important that you create spaces in the midst of your busyness in order to be revitalized by the Spirit of Jesus, so that when needs do arise and opportunities do reappear, then you will be ready and you will be able to respond to them. Let me tell you a story. It's an old story, but it's such a good one because, well, it hits to the point of this passage. And besides, there's always a new generation that needs to hear this message. Some of you may never have heard the story. As the story goes, there was once a young lumberjack who one day challenged an older co-worker to a contest. And the young man wanted to see which of them could cut down the most trees in a given period of time. So they went at it. By sundown, it became apparent that the older man had won the contest, hands down, which the younger lumberjack couldn't figure out how he had done so, because the younger lumberjack had been chopping nonstop, while the older worker had stopped every hour or so. So when the young man asked the older one how this could be, how could he out-chop him, the older man explained, "Every time I sat down," he said, "I was sharpening my axe." At which point the younger man realized that the reason he lost was because he was too busy cutting down trees to sharpen his axe. See, one thing is certain: humans find that the needs that exist all around us, well, they never take a vacation. Hurting hearts are always on the clock. And if we are serious about doing something about both, then we need to follow the invitation and example of Jesus to find those times of rest and renewal, so that we might then return to the challenges of each day, ready to transform them for the glory of God. Yes, the world will always call us back soon enough, probably sooner than we would ever want. That's because the devil never does stop. And that's truly why the devil is the way he is. But we do stop. We stop, if only for a season. We stop to make ourselves available to God so that we might be a different kind of people. A people like Jesus. Compassionate, merciful, and truly tireless in our efforts to put this world to rights. Thank you so much for listening today. Now, you do your best to find some time in the midst of your busyness to get away with Jesus, perhaps even as you've done today. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week.